married his wife, I thought about him. Here he was, this forlorn character. That was the Christ that I encountered. That's a few days. This was on Saturday. This was yesterday. Oh no, this wasn't. Well, okay. The setting here is Mercy Retirement Care Facility and Home in Oakland, off of 35th at Foothill. Some of you know that facility. That's a wonderful facility. My mother suffered a very serious stroke about a month and a half ago. She, age of 74 years old, my mother worked full-time at the Chancery, the Roman Catholic Diocese of Oakland Central Services Office. She worked there for many, many years. She was getting up to go to work from Berkeley into downtown Oakland, as she generally does, and got out of bed and suffered a very severe stroke, which left her her left arm and left leg debilitated, as well as leaving her partially blind. She is living with my sisters in Pleasant Hill, having moved out of a place in Berkeley, and we're looking at different places for her to stay. We took her to her Mercy Center yesterday, Mercy Retirement Center. She wanted to go to a place where she could have Mass every day and Rosary every day. My mother had been going to Mass every day since she came here from Hawaii back in 1957. So we went to Mercy Center, and on the floor that my mother, we're looking at the apartment for my mother, on the floor that she will possibly live on, much to my surprise, are two old priest friends who I've known for many, many years. And so we were wheeling my mother in a wheelchair, and I saw these two names on the doors. I said, "You've got to be kidding me." And so I knocked on these doors, and they're popping out. So, "Hey, Jason. Hey, Barry. Hey, Jason. Hey, Louie. What's going on, man?" My mother's kind of looking like, "What is going on here?" And for me, it was and I hadn't seen those guys in years, but these are people I used to work with. But I remember at the end, as I was running back to St. Leander, because the bishop was coming over for confirmation, I thought to myself, that's again one of those experiences of Christ that you don't expect. It's one of these experiences that touch you, and maybe there's a message behind that. You know, the message behind that for me was, yeah, Mama's going to be at this place because she's surrounded by priests. I mean, yeah. So that was one of those things that you say, okay, God, thank you, or God, thank you for at least somehow trying to comfort this guy in the midst of his own kind of struggle of loss. So the experience of Christ, as we can all recognize, comes to us as a surprise oftentimes, comes to us unexpectedly, comes to us in the least likely moment, but it comes to us. And the important thing is to acknowledge that. If you don't share it with somebody else, write it down, do something to allow that experience to live, because that's the lived experience of Christ in our lives as well too. Father James Martin is a Jesuit priest. The Jesuits have a real good way. That's why, by the grace of God, we have a Jesuit pope and a Jesuit bishop, because there's a deep, profound sense of spirituality that they embrace that invites us to try to see God in all things and the presence of Christ in all the interactions and experience that characterize our faith journey. Father James Martin has a kind of a daily examen that he invites people to ponder and pray over at the end of the day. And again, remember, he begins, it's a fivefold examen process. So I just thought I'd just kind of share that with you as we wind down a little bit. Remember that you're in the presence of Christ in a special way when you pray. Ask Jesus for help in your own prayer. It's like a great common sense. This is the one I love, because this is the one where we begin to really see Christ in our daily lives. Recall 2 or 3 things that happened today for which you are especially grateful. Savor them. Thank Jesus for these gifts. Something like that happened to me at of all places, Harry's Hofbrau. This afternoon. Harry's Hofbrau in San Leandro. Off 150 120. I try to get these.
I've been there many times.
Oh yeah, around the hospital's on the corner, right?
Yes.
Harry's Hofbrau. Typical old style Hofbrau place, right? So I'm also a chaplain for the Alameda County Sheriff's Department. So a bunch of us were gathered for lunch that day. And one of the gathered there, today, it was after this afternoon, someone who was gathered there was someone I knew who was evangelical Protestant. He is the chaplain, one of the chaplains for the East Bay Regional Parks District. So he asked me, we're talking about St. Leander for whatever reason. Then he goes, "My father goes to St. Leander." Of course, I'm shocked because the guy's an evangelical pastor, right? He goes, my father goes to St. Landeza. It's like, oh, really? Really? Then he goes, oh, my father opens the church up every morning. Oh, really? Which means I should know this guy, right? And I, because I'm a really smart guy, I connect that. Okay, his last name is Guest. The guy who opens the church at St. Landeza, his last name is Guest. I said, is your father's name Ron? And he goes, yes, that's my father who opens the door at St. Landeza every morning. And I remember being both shocked, excited, disappointed, wondering what happened in the context of this guy's life that he left St. Landeza Church and became evangelical Protestant. Then I remembered, because Ron had mentioned to me a few days ago that his daughter had died in a tragic accident on the Stanislaus River back in 1982. And then it dawned in my own mind, wow, maybe that was the conversion experience that he must have needed, my friend, who was the chaplain, that maybe drew him away from the Catholic Church and found something else. And that's another whole argument altogether. But it was nonetheless a moment of Christ, because there, I was able to get a sense of this person's faith struggle, the connection to the Catholic Church that he had, and the fact that his father opens up St. Leander every morning, and here's someone I've known for about 4 years, and I would have never known that. But again, some of the things some of the places you experience the sacred moment could even be as benign as Harry's hot brown over a turkey leg. Lots of gravy. Recall some of those things that have happened today, which you're especially grateful for God's presence. Renew your day from start to finish, noticing where you experience the Lord's presence. Notice everything from large things to small things, things that are enjoyable in interaction with a friend, to the feel of the sun on your face. Or for those of us in San Leandro, the wind at your back. For all those hot days you've had all last week, there's something just refreshingly cool about that San Leandro wind that comes sailing through off of Davis Street. Where did you love? Who loved you today? You may have sinned today, or perhaps done something you regret. Express your sorrow to the Lord and ask for forgiveness. If it's a grave sin, pray about seeking forgiveness from the person you've offended, or perhaps experience for yourself the sacrament of reconciliation. You may want to return to a meaningful part of your prayer and speak to the Lord about how you felt. At the close of the prayer, ask for God's grace for the following day. We can always use more grace in our life, particularly if we don't know what's going on the next day. The Lord knows all kinds of stuff happened that next day. We don't know about. So Father James Martin concludes by saying, over time, as you pray this examen, you'll notice God's presence in the moment. As I mentioned earlier, you become more aware of, like, whoa, this is where God is right now. Or, whoa, this is a special moment that can only be attributed to the grace of God. Either you can see that just at the end of the day, or perhaps you'll see that in its present moment. You'll see the whole day, your whole day becomes kind of a prayer. Because what's going to happen is your whole day is going to be attuned to the awareness of the sacred. Your whole day is going to be attuned to the presence of Christ, the lives you meet. That you'll have your mind open to those experiences. And you know them because you'll feel them and experience them in a profound way. And you will be like, as a Jesuit would say, contemplative in action. I know you can't read these, but I have a spiritual director. I've had a spiritual director for many, many years. He's a professor at the Jesuit School of Theology in Berkeley. His name is Father George Murphy. At least for 15 years, I've been seeing him on a monthly basis to talk about my own spiritual journey. He asks me to always look at these questions when I go to bed at night. Take a look at a moment. You know what?
To be aware of God's presence over here, but
You can hear me
it's
okay.
clearer.
Take a moment to be aware of God's presence. Look over my day. How am I feeling? What touched my heart? What was important to me? What engaged me? What did I enjoy? Where did I find life? What excited me? What fed me? What discouraged me? What frustrated me? What angered me? Were there any moments where God was particularly close? Ask God to look at my day with me. What was important to God? And can I talk with God about that? I'm always struck by what was important to God. Because what may have been important to me may not have been important to God. And what was important to God may not have been important to me. And my spiritual director always seems to ask that question. What do you think? He would say, what do you think God would have thought about that? And of course, that's when my common sense mind would say, it wouldn't have made a whole lot of difference for God. It was more my ego at work. Now, there's the last part, because I was asked to talk about talking like Christ. And that's, I think people in their own common sense know what talking like Christ is. You mentioned that earlier. It's like, well, you had some anger or some frustrations with that person, but talking like Christ means you're not going to go up to them and make, you know. I mean, so that's the common sense of Christ speaking to your own heart, saying, you know what it means to and a lot of it means being humble. You know, a lot of being, you know, just shut your mouth and just be humble about it, okay? Just not say nothing, because that's the way it's supposed to be. So, again, these seem like real common sense things, but they relate back to Scripture and how God invites us in the person of Christ to respond to various situations. Let this humble mind be in you. That was also in Christ Jesus in Philippians. Be prepared to say sorry, of course. Be considerate of all others. Love is always patient and kind. We heard that in 1 Corinthians. And, of course, the voice and tone of language. Speak kindly. My mom always taught me that. Speak kindly. I never, hardly, it didn't work very often, but I tried. So, anyway, but, thank you. Any questions? Anyone want to throw something at me?
Turn on the light, please.
Here, turn on the light. Really good concept, by the way. Yes? Question?
Can you see in the future that the Catholic Church would be, the presence would be on TV, talking to millions of people, and be vocal about what they speak about?
I think you've got, first of all, I think you've got a real advocate in Francis. I mean, Francis is doing that. Pope Francis is doing that, and the secular press is picking up on that. I mean, it's worth noting that magazines as varied as Rolling Stone, as Time, as let's see who else. There are a bunch of other magazines that have featured, you know, extensive articles on the present Pope. Advocate, the nation's largest gay magazine, had a affirming article about the Pope. Vanity Fair had an article about the Pope. So there's a variety of different magazines that have just started. So that's, in some ways, unintentionally, I think, we as a Catholic community are doing that. If we were more organized about that, that would probably be much more effective as the American church. But we're not that coordinated about that, and that's just something that's unfortunate. But I think the Pope is helping us to do that on a much global level, I think.
Is it because of the limitations we are being fenced off? You know, we can do this because we're Catholics.
No,
we're
because,
not,
well,
we're not the same as other religions.
We're, for the most part, whether you believe this or not, for the American Catholic Church, we're fairly decentralized, meaning each diocese has its own kinds of resources, its own kind of material, its own kinds of, so to coordinate those kind of efforts on a national level, various dioceses can probably do that on its own. I mean, if the Diocese of Oakland chose, they can go ahead and buy airtime on KTVU if they chose to do that. They'll probably do that for larger events. But there isn't a coordinated national effort to have that kind of larger, broad evangelical outreach to the larger community representing the Catholic Church and its teachings. We do that on our own. We do that as perhaps as parishes in our own individual cities. We might do that as a particular diocese in the geographic area. But as far as doing that on a national level, we're pretty uncoordinated about that. Yes?
Well, I think also what's helping with that too is EWTN, because they are on cable and they are on radio. It's extremely important because there's so much more conversions happening in the country.
Well, to the extent that they're available in various cable markets, because some markets don't carry EWTN as an option. Like, I don't think you get it in Oakland, but you get it certainly in Hayward. I mean, that comes free to Hayward, San Leandro, Fremont residents get that as part of their package. And yet, you're in Berkeley, you don't get that. So, yeah. So, and again, limited coverage. The radio as well too, because the AM, I believe, it's the 1260. I forget what it's and yet even still, that's limited with regards to the kind of coverage and range of that. So.
Yes, but the good thing though is that at least they're starting to slowly but surely buy more and more regions, coverage areas. Like they just bought the Los Angeles area.
And that's a major market. That's a major market.
So at least we're getting out there.
One of the things I used to do is I used to represent the priests of the Western U.S. to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. I did that for 5 years as part of my responsibility. When the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops meet throughout the country, there's a priest from each of the 12 regions of the country that represents the issues of the priests for that region. So for the region of California, Hawaii, and Nevada, for a 5-year period, I represented the priests of this region to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. So at every meeting where the bishops met, I was able to meet back and report back to the leadership of the priests of this area, kind of what goes on at a national level. So there's kind of awareness about the kind of things that went on at that level. That's interesting. So. Anything else? Any questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, Father. In your presentation, you said, I think 30% of adult Catholics are practicing.
This is 30% of those American Catholics are practicing, meaning of the, say as a percentage-wise, 100%. 30 of those would be those who grew up Catholic. 30 of them are continuing to practice their faith, as opposed to 100%.
Right, and the millennials are even worse. It's only 17%.
Right.
What's the church going to do about reversing the trend?
Well, I think it's got to do a number of things. I think it's got to be, you have to have leadership that's going to be able to, again, talk about what the experience of Christ means for them. I don't know how often you hear in your own homilies a priest talking about his personal relationship with Christ and how he encountered Christ in the context of his work or in the context of his life. I don't know. We can talk about how it relates to your experience, to our common experience. How do we see Christ in the everyday? How can we see Christ as he relates to our day-to-day lives? As people living in the San Francisco Bay Area, in the East Bay, in 2014. I mean, and I think there's an ongoing and deep kinds of struggle that's going on in the church right now that has to do with our inability, at some level, to revitalize the local church. I hear so often people in the parishes who are either dissatisfied with that they're not inspired or they're not. I'll just say it. Sometimes I hear parishioners, they don't understand what the priests are saying on a lot of different levels. They don't understand, both unable to speak or unable to, or even understand their language. So I hear that quite a bit. So people are looking to be fed elsewhere. You see that particularly in the Latino community, where since they don't have a real strong presence of Latino priests, that you have a lot of people going to faith communities that are vibrant, that are exciting, that are being led with powerful preaching, and they're being inspired by that with the music that's enabled them to reconnect to their worship life. So they leave and go elsewhere because they don't feel like they're being fed in the Catholic Church. For a lot of different reasons. Maybe pastors, we have a lot of our priests are coming in from other countries, and they don't know how to work in a multicultural environment. We have guys who are coming from India who don't speak Spanish and refuse to speak Spanish, and yet the overwhelming majority of many of our parishes are Spanish speaking. So it's one of those struggles. It's like how. So they're going elsewhere. We see that in the Pew Research studies have shown they're leaving because they're not being fed in the Catholic Church. I was at a meeting with a bunch of Catholic priests a few days ago. They talked about the Spanish-speaking community and why people are leaving. Because a lot of priests are like, well, I'm not going to speak Spanish, so okay, fine then. We're leaving. We're going elsewhere. There's a parish in, I'm going to say where it's at. It's on the other side of the hill, where the Spanish folks are leaving because they're not being affirmed by the priest that's there. They're going, and that priest speaks Spanish. They're going to another parish where the priest doesn't speak Spanish, but he's open to having a Latino presence. Guadalupe, all the different kinds of activities that go around that. Yes, ustedes están bienvenidos para por aquí, para salvar sus barrios, cosas, no? So that's the struggle. So we're losing people, and then some people are losing more people than they're being losing. So we got to do something to revitalize this, because if this is happening, your kids and grandkids, if they're not going to church, or they're going to go somewhere else. Yes.
The Apostolic Exhortation of Pope Francis is a good book.
Excellent book.
Okay.
Excellent.
There's no question about
Excellent.
it. But the question is that how will that be brought up? Actually, how will that be disseminated to the parishes? But by is the bishop if I may say so, are they in obedience to the Pope to begin with? Okay, they seem like